Yo, what is going on, Guardians, and welcome back to another Destiny 2 gameplay video. In this video, we're going to chat about the Vex Mythoclast, since it's been buffed this season. Just this past weekend in Trials of Osiris, the Vex Mythoclast topped the charts with 6.8 million kills. That's roughly 1 out of every 17 kills in the playlist this weekend. Now, the next most used weapon was the Messenger at 3.7 million kills. Now, before we continue, can we just at least appreciate the fact that the top 4 out of the 5 top weapons in Trials this weekend were primaries? Like, Feldminster's Lie was down in 4th place. Can I just say that it was so incredibly refreshing to have a game mode that was largely dominated by primaries for a change. And even though Vex was on top, hand cannons overall still were the most used weapon type, with over 22 million kills collectively to Vex's 6.8 million. Now, I know it's easy to single out one weapon based on its usage, but that doesn't ultimately tell the entire story. The fact is that there's only one Mythoclast, but there are several great hand cannons, and among the top 10 weapons used, the Ace, Thorn, and Palindrome all made the cut, so that's something to bear in mind. But returning to the topic of the Vex, let's first just talk about what happened with the buff, right? I actually never fired, admittedly, I never fired a single shot of the Vex this season. Until just yesterday. Everyone kept telling me how crazy it was, and I was seeing it all over PvP, but I didn't have the catalyst completed yet, and I never bothered to see for myself until after the first weekend of Trials was done and over with. So yesterday, I got to experience the buff from the user's perspective, not just on the receiving end. And the buff, as it pertains to PvP, it gave the Vex more range. It essentially gave it Rampage and Heating Up as part of the catalyst. It gave the linear fusion firing mode a faster charge time, and it increased the rate of fire from 360 rounds per minute to 390 without taking down its impact value. That's important. Right out of the gate, you gotta admit that these buffs are substantial, to say the least. But as we move forward in this conversation, we have to consider a few things. One of those things is the question, how do we toe the line between exotics and weapons of other rarities? What should our expectations be for a weapon with a yellow border, considering the cost of equipping one? They can't receive weapon mods, and you can only have one equipped at a time, so using one means foregoing another, like a Lorenz Driver, or a Telesto, or a Last Word, Thorn, Ace, etc. Another thing we have to consider is, what are our expectations for primary weapons? Historically, the Destiny community has repeated the phrase buff primaries, season after season, year after year. And so we have to be cautious whenever we talk about primaries being potentially too good. We certainly don't want to set a precedent that discourages potent primary buffs. So where do we draw the line? Alright, so in terms of the Vex's measurable and quantifiable strengths, let's dive into what makes it stand out. The Vex has an optimal TTK of 0.77 seconds. Now that requires the target to stand in the open out of cover for the full duration in order to achieve that TTK. Now remember, Vex is technically the same impact as a 360 RPM auto rifle, but now it fires an extra bullet once every 2 seconds while in full auto. That means other auto rifles of its same impact value will kill in 0.83 seconds optimally, compared to Vex's 0.7 seconds. 0.77 seconds. Now, the majority of all Vex kills will not be 0.77 seconds. Enemies will be moving, jumping, dodging, dipping in and out of cover, or any combination of the above. So landing 5 to 6 crits in a volley in a row is not going to be the standard. But let's work with that optimal TTK and make some comparisons. What else kills that fast potentially? Well, that's actually the same optimal TTK as a rapid fire frame auto rifle like a Chroma Rush, which by the way can roll with Heating Up and Rampage. So that's something that you can compare to the Vex. Well, Vex will obviously outrange a Chroma Rush on paper, but again, hitting those crits for that optimal TTK down range gets much harder. And at that range, an aggressive frame or a high impact frame pulse rifle will both outperform a Vex's optimal TTK, as will a Lorenz Driver or a sniper rifle. But the high impact frames and aggressive frame pulses have 0.67 and 0.73 seconds optimal TTK respectively. In closer range duels, Every single sidearm archetype will outduel a Vex in terms of optimal TTKs, and so will every SMG archetype except for precision frames. So I know a lot of people are getting hung up on the fact that it shoots one extra bullet while in full auto every 2 seconds. But it's important to keep in perspective what that actually translates to in combat. It's also important to remember why auto rifles aren't used too often in PvP in the first place. Auto rifles have nice optimal TTKs, but once again, they require sustained fire throughout the entire duration of that TTK. A hand cannon, conversely, might have a 0.87 optimal TTK, 0.87 seconds, but while strafing in and out of cover to peak shot opponents, a Vex might only land 3 total bullets during that 0.87 seconds because the target wasn't in the open for the entire duration of the duel. So the hand cannon comes out on top due to their forgiving aim assist values, the hitboxes, making peak shotting much easier to do than with the Vex Mythoclast. So while Vex has the potential to absolutely melt people with its base stats and values, it does have some important conditions that have to be met in order to make that happen. This makes the Vex especially strong in 6s where targets are less cautious and more frequently caught off guard due to the chaotic nature of the playlist. But in trials and comp, the Vex is less deadly in my opinion because not only are players leveraging cover more frequently and paying closer attention, but the Vex is also not going to be able to leverage its alternate firing mode nearly as often. I know I played enough trials to reset my my whole trials reputation this weekend. I played 120 matches, and during that time, I did not die to a single time to a Vex in its linear fusion mode. I only lost one match to a team using the Vex Mythoclast during those 120 matches, and admittedly, I deserved it for continuing to push their team, standing all together in rifts with stag helmets and arc souls. And I would argue that it wasn't even the Vex that was the predominant factor in that loss as much as it was the well-orchestrated team fire and the rift usage on the other team. Now, up to this point, it's probably sounded like I'm in the boat of don't nerf Vex, it's fine. And regarding all the factors that we've talked about so far, that would be true. But there's one more factor I'd like to break down, and that's the damage and stability buff that you receive with the Catalyst. After getting a kill, you have several seconds where the Vex will dish out 43 damage to the head and 23 damage to the body instead of 36 and 22 respectively, while also becoming simultaneously much more stable, making it easier to control in ranges way deeper, so you can receive these optimal TTKs from way deeper on the map while dueling things like pulse rifles and maybe even the occasional scout rifle. So this brings the optimal TTK down to 0.62 seconds. Now here's where I start to draw my line. Everything before this in our conversation was fine to me. I was willing to go along with it and see Vex as a unique and strong weapon in the sandbox. But this is the part where I start to say, maybe we're starting to step into the realm of broken weapons. Once you get this thing spun up, it is kind of ridiculous. Especially if you're running like Devour, which I was able to drop 53 defeats, 40 final blows with the Vex in a single match, leveraging this combo, and it felt like picking flowers on a sunny day. If it were up to me, I think this is the thing that I would target if we were going to entertain the thought of nerfing the Vex. If Bungie came out and said that they were going to shorten the duration of that stability and damage buff, I'd be fine with that. If they said they were going to keep the stability buff on kills, on final blows, but drop the damage buff entirely, I'd be fine with that. I don't think that the Vex needs that buff in order to be strong and desirable in Destiny 2. Now that being said, I'm not rushing out to social media to beg for a nerf just yet. We've gone through many seasons in Destiny where certain weapons were stronger for longer. I wouldn't be upset if Vex stayed unchanged until, halfway through the season or something, or a third of the way through the season since this is a longer one. The Vault of Glass is free to play, and it isn't gatekept behind a paywall. It's arguably the easiest raid in the game right now in terms of difficulty and light level demands, and it has some solid counters on the table if you can't get your hands on it. You aren't out of options if you don't have a Vex. I've been out dueling Vexes all season so far without ever having picked one up myself until just yesterday. Pulse's peak shotting, Lorentz drivers doming Vex users with big hitboxes and low flinch, hand cannons, using close to cover tactics to drop Vex users. There are lots of viable options out there. And before you start saying casual players can't do these things, I'm going to stop you right there and ask, is that actually true? I think that any player can implement small and simple new habits into their gameplay if they choose to do so. Any player can consciously make an effort to start moving closer to cover instead of out in the middle of the lanes. And any player can choose to start dueling while standing right beside a piece of cover that they can duck into after taking a shot. Lots of these tactics, they're not MLG pro gamer moves that require obscene amounts of game sense and intuition. It's just a choice that you make. Same way you start to implement one new thing into your golf swing at a time. Or the same way that you start to train your brain to change a diaper faster because you've built up the muscle memory after several successful completions. We're already doing these things in other facets of our lives, and Destiny is no different. Alright, I think we've exhausted this conversation for now, so let me know in the comments section what you think about the Vex. Would you change it or not? Is it fine? Is it broken? Or is it somewhere in between, towing the line? What would you change, if anything? If you're interested in short, entertaining content and clips, I just launched a clips channel called True Vanguard Clips. I'll put the link in the channel description if you want to check it out and sub to that channel. There are currently no ads running on that channel. It's just quick, fun moments, so feel free to check that out. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be warm and well fed, my friends, and I hope to catch you in the Crucible.